Hello, my friends. Wait a few minutes for people to join us. If you're here already, please say hi in the comments so I know you're here and I know who's here. Um, Solipsistic is here. Hello to you too. It's good to see you. Lots of regulars now. It's really nice every week to welcome you here to 18th century New York City and my home, and to see so many people who are regulars who come to see me every week. Ms. Wang, hello. Um, If you're wondering what's behind me, this is an 18th century kitchen. LB Girl 88, hello, good to see you again. This is an 18th century kitchen, and this kitchen exists in the basement of the Billup House in Staten Island, New York, or also called the Conference House. And this is their kitchen. It is, you can kind of see over here, there's some light coming through. There's a window there, and it's on a lower level, and you can see the bottom is all brick. So this room would stay nice and cool in the summer and would be easy to heat in the winter as well. So this is actually a very large room. If you're near Staten Island, around Staten Island, you can visit the Billup House, and they'll take you down and show you this room. It's a very nice room with a big hearth. There's a chair behind me that I'm going to stand in front of so it doesn't bother us, but it's a beautiful hearth. And this home was built in the late 1600s. So a beautiful hearth or kitchen room from the 18th century New York. Miss Fisher from New Jersey. Fisher from New Jersey. Oh my God, a long, long name from, oh, Richard and Janice. Whatever that long name is you two are using tonight, I love it. Deluxious Foods from Rhode Island. Keenan, of course, Mr. Davis is here. It's great to see everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about what's happening in America in 1775, but most of tonight, we're going to be talking about 18th century literature and fiction books that I enjoy. And I have one more thing I have to set up here for us that will be ready to go so that I can switch through these books when it's time to show them to you. Oh, Miss Wetzel is here. Good evening, Mrs. Q. My history-loving daughter and I are joining you from Philadelphia. Thank you so much. You have a big event happening in Philadelphia this weekend, don't you? The commissioning of General Washington. I have quite a few friends who are going to be there. Mr. Q and I were invited to go, but I have to tell you, we are quite lazy and not up to the trip to Philadelphia. But that is a very, very big and nice event that's happening also this weekend in Philadelphia. I think today and tomorrow, tomorrow and Saturday, 13th and 14th, is a big event is going on around the release of the movie. Um, is it called The Modern Miracle? I'm so embarrassed I don't know the name of this movie, but the movie is about the founding of America, and I have two very good friends in this movie. One is playing George Washington, and the other is playing John Adams. The American Miracle is the movie. So that also is going on in Philadelphia this weekend, and I think it's also opened in different places around America. So I'll be going out to see that, especially since two good friends of mine, friends both from the reenactor community and in other ways, are starring in that movie. So that was really great. Ms. Wetzel says that Mr. Franklin lost her invitation. Well, that's typical of Mr. Franklin, isn't it? With his mind on so many things all the time that he can't keep things straight and becomes very absent-minded. I've heard that about him from others. Ms. Kane is here. Hello. Solipsistic says, since you talked about a list of foods last stream, would you ever consider doing a stream where you cook? I am going to do a live stream about cooking, and I am not going to cook, but someone I know who is an 18th century cook is going to cook, and we are going to hold it in an authentic 1790s hearth here near where I live. And she'll be cooking, and Mrs. Q will be watching and asking questions. So we're working on planning that out now, and that's a lovely kitchen as well. And I've used that as a background at sometimes. So yes, that is coming. We will be doing a live one night cooking in a hearth. Mrs. Healy is here, my old friend Mrs. Healy. Ms. Wetzel says that she'll excuse Mr. Franklin this time. I think we can excuse him this time. I don't know who's playing Franklin in the movie, but as I said, good friends of mine are playing young Washington and John Adams. My friend who's playing John Adams, many of you have seen me work with before. That's Kyle Jenks, who generally plays James Madison. And we have done quite a lot of work together over the years as Mrs. Q and James Madison. It's kind of cool to see him playing John Adams. So that's sort of neat. So here we are. Let's see. It is, what is it? It is July 12th. It is July 12th, 1775. And we are here in Hanover Square, New York City. Let's see. My friends Richard and Janice are sending me, "Oh, I'm a good old rebel now." Famous Reconstruction era song in the South, except of course, I don't know what Reconstruction is because I haven't got there yet, but thank you for the information anyway. So a few interesting things going on here in 1775 New York. First of all, I would like to say that I am completely disgusted with so many people here in this town who simply cannot seem to see the truth that is right in front of their eyes every day. How can anyone here really think that either of those factions in the parliament, either Whigs or Tories, cares at all about them? It seems impossible to me that one would trust either of these two factions. Now, many people here in New York say that we can trust the Whigs, that the Whigs have always been friends to us, and it's true, and in some ways they have been friends to us. But keep in mind that they are still the parliament. Ms. Kane says, "My sister likes you too. Her name is Chrissy. Hi, Chrissy. Thank you so much for tuning in to see me tonight." So I don't really understand why anyone here would trust either of these factions that are part of a corrupt governing system. And indeed, we've known for many years that the parliament is completely corrupt. It does not matter whether you're a Whig or a Tory. Each one of those factions seeks only to use the colonies for their own interests, to further their own wealth and power. It is becoming very tedious here in New York that people cannot view the bigger picture of what's happening, that we cannot continue to live under a completely corrupt government, that agreeing with one of those factions or another, or depending on one of those factions or another to represent us or to hear our grievances and address them fairly, is just simply an illogical way to look at it. And you know that I am always illogical in the way I look at things. But it seems to me that if a system is corrupt, you can no longer work within that system, because all you'll get is more corruption, more and more and more. Maybe it will go away for a time, disguise itself, and come back, but we will always be dealing with that corruption that is going on in England and especially in London in the Parliament. So I've been finding myself lately to be very impatient with those among us who seem to think that either of those factions are good for us. Whether they agree that the Tories will look out for us or the Whigs will look out for us, I think that they are misled and misguided and really do need to see the bigger picture, and that we need to exist without them. I know this is becoming less of a radical thing for me to say now in 1775, but still some people are quite hesitant or quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Unwilling to admit the truth that seems to me to be right in front of their eyes. So we'll see how this progresses, but for now, we have in our city of New York some of the population who agrees to separate from England, and some of the population who believes the Whigs will look out for us, and some who believe the Tories will look out for us. And my feeling is that anyone who believes England will look out for us or wants to depend on England to look out for us, why, it's all a Tory, isn't it? Name it what you'd like, but they're all Tories. So that's some of my thoughts of what's going on. Now, I did want to share with you an amusing thing that was printed in the papers here today, and I need to look for it. I thought I had it right here for us. Let me just take a quick look here. I think I can find it somewhat quickly. Oh, and here it is. So this was printed here today, and it's printed from a few days ago in the Virginia Gazette. And it's a little story about the origin of the word Yankee. As you know, we call our friends, our sometimes friends, more often rivals in New England, Yankees. So this says a correspondent has favored us with the following etymology of the word Yankee. When the New England colonies were first settled, the inhabitants were obliged to fight their way against many nations of Indians. They found but little difficulty in subduing them all except one tribe who were known by the name of Yankoos, which signifies invisible. Which signifies invisible. The Yakus are invisible. That's good. I read this earlier and laughed as well. After the waste of much blood and treasure, the Yakus were at last subdued by the New England men. The remains of this nation, agreeable to the Indian custom, transferred their name to their conquerors. For a while they were called Yankoos, but from a corruption common to names in all languages, they got, through time, the name Yankees, a name which we hope will soon be equal to that of a Roman or an ancient Englishman. Thus from today's, well, a few days ago, Virginia Gazette, and today in Mr. Holt's paper. So I wonder what you think about that name for Yankees. And I think what they're trying to do is, show some respect to the Yankees in New England, who right now are fighting so hard against England and making up a cute story of how they got their name through conquest, and then hoping that that name will resonate as the Romans did. I think it's a quite fun little story. I wanted to share it with you. Now, tonight, I would like to talk about 18th century novels, and I'm going to step out of 1775 for the rest of our evening together, because a lot of the books I'm going to talk about were published after 1775, or some of the better ones. Now, the first book I was going to talk about, but I've decided to spend very little time on it, but just to show it to you so you'll know about it, is Pamela by Sir Samuel Richardson. Pamela was published, I think, in 1741. Mr. Franklin is here. He says, General Braddock become quite aware of invisible Indians, those invisible Indians, by Sir Samuel Richardson. And Pamela, well, let me first say that my mother would not allow us to read Pamela because she said that it was full of depravity that one finds in the upper classes in England that she did not want her daughters associated with. So, of course, my sister and I had to sneak around to read Pamela. Mr. Linden says Mr. Fenimore Cooper will eventually write that it comes simply from Indians who had trouble pronouncing English. All of these great stories of all of the names that have occurred over time. Thank you, Mr. Linden, for that. So, in the story, Pamela, all young ladies were required in England to read Pamela. Of course, this was written long before I was born, 1741, but still, that's besides the point. 1741. And the story of Pamela is about a young woman who takes a position in an aristocrat's home. And they are very nice to her. She's working as a maid. And then the father dies, and what can I say? The son who becomes Lord is a lecher, and he will not keep his hands off of her. And he keeps trying to have his evil ways with her, and it's all the different ways she tries to get out of this without losing her job, because she needs to have her job. And there's a wonderful illustration in it where he actually steals one of her letters that she writes home, asking for someone to please come and take her out of this man's care. And you can see her standing there, and he's reading her letter. It's very disapproving, and there's all sorts of things in the book that I'm sure my mother didn't want me to read, because she runs away from herself. She locks herself in a closet. She locks herself in a pantry. He has the keys. He drags her out. Terrible things go on in this book, but eventually, she gives in and she decides to marry this man. And now she becomes the mistress of the estate. So I'm really not sure what this book is all about. It could be about maintaining your virtue, and then the man who pursues you eventually, will marry you, and you'll achieve greatness. Or, as my mother thought, it was simply about the depravity of the upper classes in England and what the young women who worked for them had to be subjected to. So that's Pamela, which I don't want to really say that much about, but will become a very famous book. It's a very famous book in the 18th century, but it will become over time as well. And a number of satires of Pamela were written as well, making fun of the book. So that's one if you want to try Pamela by Richardson. It's very easy to find, and you might have fun reading it. Our next book is, one of my favorites, The History of Miss Betsy Thoughtless. When my mother was disgusted with me because I didn't want to fix myself up for boys' attention, and I didn't want to behave properly, and I didn't want to go to etiquette school, and all I wanted to do was learn to run my father's business, she would say to me, I suppose you're planning to be another Miss Betsy Thoughtless. So who is Miss Betsy Thoughtless? Miss Betsy Thoughtless is one of my favorite books about a woman who chooses not to live a conventional life. She's married off very young to a man who is abusive toward her, and she leaves him and she goes on to live her own independent life, and then marries a man with whom she truly falls in love and has a fulfilling life as a wife with him. And she goes on to be a very happy wife. But there's a lot of the book with Miss Betsy Thoughtless talking about how horrific marriage is for women and how she'll never be a wife and she will never subjugate herself that way. But eventually when she meets the right man, she finds much pleasure in sharing his life with him and becoming his wife. Oh, Mr. White is here. Good evening, Mr. White. I think this is a wonderful book, and I recommend it to you in the future to read as well, The History of Miss Betsy Thoughtless, because it isn't like very many other books out at that time. It's very radical and very different. And the author, and here I have my copy here, The History of Miss Betsy Thoughtless by Eliza Haywood. If you can find the Pandora Press copy, it's no longer available. I found this in the back room of a used bookstore in Johnson City, New York, many years ago. But if you can find the Pandora Press copy, it's a really good copy. Eliza Haywood wrote guides. Remember last week I talked a little bit about that cooking guide for women. She also wrote guides for women. She wrote guides for women about how to be happy in life, how to live your life in a way that's fulfilling and happy, how to be a good wife and a good mother, and how to find fulfillment in those things. Yet she also wrote this book about if you're in an abusive marriage, you ought to live your own life until you find the right match so that you can then go on to be fulfilled in life. So I always liked this. And as I said, when I was difficult, my mother would say to me, I suppose you're planning to be a Miss Betsy Thoughtless. In other words, she was saying to me that I wanted to do everything my own way and find my own husband. And well, what did I do? I did indeed do everything my own way, and I did find my own husband, Mr. Q. So I suppose that reading Miss Betsy Thoughtless when I was a young lady inspired me to do the same. And I must say, I'm very happy with Mr. Q all of these years. So highly recommended The History of Miss Betsy Thoughtless. And these were both written before the American Revolution. I'm not sure the year of Miss Betsy Thoughtless. Let me look. I think it's 1750s, perhaps. Let's see, Mrs. Haywood died in 1756. So this must have been. She published The Female Spectator, 1744 till 1746. That was the series of articles that she wrote about women's lives, the Female Spectator. You might be able to find them in an archive somewhere now. And wouldn't you know, it doesn't say what year she wrote this, but I'm guessing this might have been the late 1740s, early 1750s. Miss Betsy Thoughtless. It's thick, I'll warn you, it's thick, but it is so good. This is such a good book. Highly recommended to you ladies, and maybe some of you gentlemen if you're interested in things like this. One that we don't hear mentioned very much, The History of Miss Betsy Thoughtless. And 1751. And I would have never known about this had I not been digging through the back room of that used bookstore many years ago in Johnson City, New York, where I found a whole pile of these Pandora at Pandora Press Books and brought them home with me. Um, some of the most beloved things in my personal library, these books. Okay, so who do we have up next after Miss Betsy Thoughtless? Ah, The Mysteries of Udolpho. Do I have Udolpho with me? This is a modern copy. World Classics, Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Udolpho, another one of my favorites. This was published, as you can see, originally in 1794, so toward the end of the 18th century, and was very popular all over England and America by Anne Radcliffe. And this is I think it might be one of the very first Gothic novels. And this is a great story about a young woman whose mother dies. She goes to live with her widowed aunt, and her aunt marries this Italian count who then kidnaps her and locks her up in a castle in Italy. And the book is full of all kinds of wonderful European scenery. So it's almost like a travel log. And a lot of people read these at the time because they didn't travel, and they're wonderful, lavish descriptions of the various places involved. So this young woman ends up locked up in a castle, and of course, the man she's in love with is searching all over for her. And it's all about the terrible things this count tries to do to her in this castle, similar to Pamela, but she's a little bit of a, she's a little bit more of a independent and, less trapped in her role as Pamela is, right? Pamela is trapped in her early 18th century role as a servant. This young woman is not a servant. She's a young lady, and she's being, pursued by this evil count. So she outsmarts him, and all sorts of things go on. But just the description of the area is just beautiful. There's a lot of good scares in it, Gothic scares, because they're in a castle. And then, of course, it has a happy ending where her lover eventually finds her and rescues her from the evil count. So The Mysteries of Udolpho, really excellent book. This World Classics version I have is very good, and I assume if Penguin has one, that's probably really good too, because this one has all kinds of notes in it explaining things you might not be familiar with from the 18th century. So it's a really good one. And let's see who's up next. As we get into the end of the 18th century, we're getting more and more scandalous. This is not what I would consider to be a scandalous book. It's quite mild, good Gothic romance. But what is up next? Oh boy, Charlotte Temple. And what is this one called? The Beautiful and Accomplished Charlotte Temple and the Lieutenant Montreville. Here's my copy. Charlotte Temple by Susanna Rawson. So this is a Oxford paperbacks. I think this is the one that's available that you can still buy. And it has all the notes in it about, to help you understand some of what's going on in the book. But that is the original cover as published in America. I think this one is also around 1795, Charlotte Temple. Charlotte Temple is written by Susanna Rawson, who is a very interesting English lady. Miss Rawson is an accomplished writer. She's also writes plays. She is an actress, and she's also a theater producer. So she's a very well-known lady at her time, very accomplished in the written and performing arts. And among all of her works, she publishes Charlotte Temple. This is also released in some places. It's called Charlotte, A Tale of Truth. So you might also find it under that name. But it's Susanna Rawson, Rawson, Susanna Rawson. And I used to have a lot of fun on my tours with this book because this has a connection that we'll talk about to Trinity Graveyard in New York City. So Charlotte Temple is the story of a young woman, Charlotte Temple. She's an only child, and she's attending a boarding school outside of London. And every Sunday, all the girls, of course, will go to chapel for services, and there'll be young men there, and they'll kind of gaze at each other across the church, and sometimes meet and sometimes talk. Well, also there in the boarding school is a young French woman, and of course, since this is 18th century England, she is the villain, or maybe she would be maybe the English would make a French woman the villain in your time as well. I'm not sure. Anyway, she's going to be the villain, and she's a designing young woman who was a student in the school but is now teaching French in the school. And she kind of has this secret relationship with an officer in the British Army. And in church one Sunday, she's with Charlotte and she's pointing across to the young man she knows, and he's standing next to a very handsome young man. A Lieutenant Montreville is his name. And she introduces Charlotte to Montreville. And Charlotte, of course, falls in love with him. He's a military officer. He's intelligent. He's charming. He has wonderful manners. And they eventually convince Charlotte to run away to New York City with them. Charlotte is 16 years old, and there's a great section of the book where they leave that night and they go and they get on the ship, and she never tells her parents or anyone where she's going. So, from their point of view, she just disappears suddenly. And then they're on the ship to America, and there's a whole lot of melodramatic stuff that happens on that ship with the French woman and an older man on his way to New York. I don't want to give too much of it away because I would like you to try reading some of these, because people think the 18th century is boring, and some of these novels are really wonderful to read. So try to inspire you to read some of them. They get to New York, and of course, she cannot live with him. They can't have officers' quarters. They're not married. So he lives in the barracks. And I'm guessing that's the upper barracks around where City Hall Park is today. And she's going to live in a bungalow on a farm around where Chinatown is today, if you're familiar with New York City. And she's going to live there on this bungalow, and they'll spend time together and, all of this. But she's spending a lot of time alone on the farm. And while she's there, another woman who owns one of those farms kind of takes notice of her and says hello and is very kind to her. Doesn't really know her or anything. They're just kind of acquaintances as they pass by each other. Well, eventually, Lieutenant Montreville, who is spending a lot of time in New York City, where there are a lot of, this is 1776, by the way, I think. It's during the British occupation. Spending a lot of time in New York City with many wealthy loyalist young ladies, falls in love with one of those wealthy loyalist young ladies, and he abandons Charlotte Temple. He sends their mutual friend, the other officer, to tell Charlotte and to bring her some money. He's such a coward. And she gets dumped in this bungalow. Well, you know what? She's also expecting a child. Now, what worse condition could she possibly be in than to be a 16-year-old girl alone in the city expecting a child, unmarried? Well, the rest of the story becomes incredibly horrific, all of the things that happen to her. And eventually she gets kicked out of her bungalow because she has no money left to pay for it. And in a really tragic scene, she is pretty much crawling down the Broadway, let's say around where Broadway and Cedar Street is today, if you know where that is, along the wide Broadway in the mud, banging on doors, hoping someone will help her. She's visibly pregnant now. And a door opens, and it happens to be the woman from that neighboring farm. And she brings Charlotte Temple into her home, finds out who she is, gets the whole story from her. And it turns out that the French villainess has captivated that woman's father and got her to marry him and has stolen his money. Great, great French villainous stuff. Well, while she's staying with this kind woman, this woman writes to Charlotte's parents and tells them where she is and that they can find her there. And of course, it takes letters weeks to get across the Atlantic, and then it takes weeks for her father to arrive to find her. And by the time her father arrives, she is giving birth to a baby girl, and she dies while giving birth to that baby. The father takes the baby with him back to England and raises her. Now, in the story, Charlotte Temple is buried in Trinity Graveyard. And if you've been to Trinity Graveyard, this is the inside cover of the book Charlotte Temple from a published version in the mid 1800s, I think. I think it's the mid 1800s. And if you've been to Trinity Church, there is a grave on the Broadway side, on the right side of the church by Broadway, that looks just like this, except this section with the plants is all filled in with concrete, and it says Charlotte Temple. So everybody goes into the church and wonders, who is Charlotte Temple? Who is Charlotte Temple? And there's all these stories about Charlotte Temple. Now, I personally think that this grave was probably a publicity stunt for the publication of this edition of the book, is probably why they put the gravestone in Trinity Churchyard, because there is no Charlotte Temple. Well, this gave rise to the legend that it really is a grave, but the woman in the grave is a young woman whose name was Charlotte Stanley. And Charlotte Stanley was supposedly a real young woman this happened to. And let's go back to the first page. And Lieutenant Montreville was really Captain John Montresor in New York. Captain Montresor, by the way, happened to be the cousin of Susanna Rawson. How scandalous is this? I mean, the story itself is rather scandalous. And they said that when people read it in New York in the 1790s, that everyone knew who the story was about, that everyone knew this was the Montresor Charlotte Stanley story. So apparently it is a true story, and that everyone realized that. And she said she wrote this about her own cousin. She said, as a warning to young women to secure their virtue. So I've talked about virtue quite a lot, haven't I, in all kinds of different contexts of the 18th century. Well, you know, a woman's virtue is her virginity. And Charlotte Stanley, I'm sorry, Susanna Rawson, who I mentioned, is a very independent, accomplished woman in the theater and in publishing, also knows it is important for women to secure their virtue, because it is one of the greatest bargaining tools you have when searching for your husband, and that a loss of virtue makes you less valuable to potential husbands. So she wrote this book about that. She said she also wanted to expose the horribleness of many British officers who came to America thinking that they could take advantage of whomever they pleased. And Captain Montresor was actually a very good choice for this, because Montresor left behind many illegitimate children in America. He married a Tory woman from New York. And you might remember that Randall's Island in the East River was once called Montresor's Island. They lived there. They bought that and lived there. And then after the war, it was renamed Randall's Island. So he married a very wealthy woman. And while he was traveling around with the military, fathered a number of children, one of whom was the third or fourth wife of Vermont's Ethan Allen. And we know that because she either later sued him for paternity, or it was right on her mother's birth certificate. John Montresor was her father. So Miss Rawson picked a very good target when she found Montresor, picked Montresor. Now, if you want to read a book that's not so long, Mysteries of Udolpho is a little long. Miss Betsy Thoughtless is very long. Charlotte Temple is not very long at all. You could read this in a couple of days. So if you want to read a shorter one, you can check out Charlotte Temple. Great, great book. And I used to take a copy of the cover on one of my New York City tours to tell this story at the grave that says Charlotte Temple. If you're in New York City, you can find it if you're standing right in front of Trinity Church. Go up Broadway to your right, and right where there used to be an entrance that is now blocked off, there's a little monument in there. Just to the left of that is Charlotte Temple, and you could go inside and look at it as well. Very interesting and provocative gravesite in Trinity Church. And the last book we're going to talk about is not even fiction, although I am sure there are those who wish it was. And it's the memoirs of Mrs. Coughlin, the daughter of Major Moncrieff. And this is the memoir of Margaret Moncrieff, a true story, and I think even more hair-raising than all the others I've discussed, because it is a true story. Mrs. Coughlin was once Miss Moncrieff, daughter of Major Moncrieff, who was stationed in New York in 1776. She grew up in America. Her father was stationed here for many years. So she grew up in America. Her mother died, and then her father's second wife second or third wife. He had three wives. One of the wives was a Livingston. I think the third one was a Livingston, but none of the wives really cared for Margaret. And in the summer of 1776, right, General Washington is on Manhattan Island with his headquarters. The British are out on Staten Island, and her father is sent off on some sort of military maneuvers. Margaret is in New Jersey, I think with her Livingston family, and she complains to her father that she's very unhappy there because she is loyal to her father, and General Howe and the Crown and the rest of the family are all rebels. And she asks if she can go to stay with General Israel Putnam in New York. I know this sounds shocking that she would be the daughter of a British major and asking to go stay with an American general, but remember, many of the officers of the American Revolution fought together in the French and Indian or 7 Years' War. And that was the case with Major Moncrieff and General Putnam. They knew each other very well. General Putnam did open his home to Miss Moncrieff. She was 14 or 15 that summer, likely 14, and lived in his home with him and his two daughters. Well, also in the home that summer was his aide-de-camp, a young officer a major named Aaron Burr. Isn't that interesting? Well, there's all kinds of stories about what went on that summer of 1776 or didn't go on between Miss Moncrieff and Mr. Burr, and she dispels all of them in her book. She says that nothing untoward went on between them, but that she did very much fall in love with him, and that she wished that she had been able to consummate that love with him and marry him and stay in America, because after knowing him, her life was miserable beyond description. Well, other stories say that she was staying in the home and that it was Burr who realized or who thought she was spying for the English, clued in Putnam, and they sent her back to Staten Island. And it's a great section of her memoir where she talks about how hard she cried when she went back to Staten Island because she really wanted to stay with General Putnam and his kind family and with the officer who she never names in the book. She then goes on to talk about her life after leaving New York, that right after that, her father married her off to another officer, a Coughlin, who she said raped and beat her so badly on the ship back to England that the ship captain actually told him he would kill him if he touched her again. So she goes back to England and she has family in Ireland and Scotland. She runs away from her husband and she stays for a time with family members. But remember, in England in the 18th century, as in America, there are very few things a woman can do to generate income. If you are not left an inheritance, there is very little you can do. And Mrs. Moncrieff talks about her now life as an escort to wealthy men. And if you've been following that very famous trial going on right now of a performer and the way he treated his various girlfriends and what they exchanged and the way they demeaned themselves in order to be on the red carpet, have wonderful clothes, have travel all over the world, and what they did in order to have those things, well, you're following a 21st century story of Mrs. Coughlin. I'm not passing judgment on these women in the current trial because I can understand how they may have started out seeking those things with this man and thought they were in love with him and then became trapped in the relationship with him. So I do talk about that. Mrs. Coughlin, though, is much colder about things, and she talks about how she doesn't really love any of these men, and she's just an escort to them, an escort. They give her money. They pay for her to live in beautiful places. She has a wonderful carriage. She has horses. She even has children by some of these men. And the men take the children and their wives raise them instead. She doesn't see her children. She runs out of money. She winds up in debtor's prison. And it is a wonderful book, eloquently written. I mean, you would think that this woman was a highly educated woman, all about what women who have no means of support are forced to do to support themselves. And she talks about how it is a tragedy that in 18th century England, this is all we can provide for women to find their way in life. And she calls on England to change this and to make more work and more opportunities available to women who do not have inheritances and who are escaping bad marriages. So the memoir of Mrs. Coughlin you'll have to look this up online. I think I got mine on archive.org. Um, and I highly suggest you read it, because if you're following this trial, you should read this and see how things have in many ways not changed for women in over 250 years. So that's what the trial reminded me of immediately, was her memoir. And, some of the men were abusive toward her. Some of them wanted her to do, depraved things. And she really had no choice, because whenever one found her dissatisfactory, they just tossed her out. And she now had no money and had to look around for another gentleman. As she got older, it was harder to do. I think she wrote this at the old age of 30 or 32, and she's already finished, right? Because there's so many younger women vying for those positions. But she does talk about the young officer, she said, who she wished she had been able to spend her life with. She said, unfortunately, he was already married to another cause, the cause of freedom and self-government, and that had she been able to stay with him, she would have had a happy life rather than the tragic life she had here. Of course, this gave rise, when this book came out, to all sorts of rumors about Aaron Burr and this young woman, and the improper things had gone on between them. And as you can guess, Mr. Burr's rivals and enemies all claimed these things did happen, and his supporters claimed that was all, garbage, that he wouldn't have done any of that. So an interesting book in that it's all true, and that it itself produced some scandals when it came out, as some memoirs do. My dog Rex says to avoid the Puritans. Well, we in New York, what we think of the Puritans, right? I won't say so. But we do have our jokes about the Puritans up to the north of us in Boston, right? These backwards provincial Puritans who claim to have done everything first themselves while having stolen most of it from other parts of the country, and who always look down on our success in New York as if they're always superior morally to us. Since they can't be superior to us financially, and they're certainly not superior to us intellectually, they claim to be superior to us morally. So we have some good laughs about that. So do any of you have any questions before we say goodbye tonight? I will be on my regular radio show on Sunday, and you can find me at republicbroadcastingnetwork.org at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. Ms. Silver says, thank you for your great presentation as always. And I know you have other plans, but I was wondering if you could do more on Benjamin Prime. Yes, you asked me. I will do some more on Benjamin Prime, because, he was a very interesting man, and he did write that great ballad, a new song for an excellent new song for the Sons of Liberty in America. That wonderful ballad that he wrote. He was a very interesting man, and I will get to him one night. Thank you for the reminder. Mr. Linden says, what did you think when Mr. Fielding wrote Shamala? Well, of course, I wasn't supposed to read Pamela, so I couldn't say I read Shamala. But an author, if you don't know who he is, Henry Fielding, who's most well known for Tom Jones, a wonderful book, an even better movie with Albert Finney, wrote a satire of Pamela called Shamala. And also, I think, was it Maria Edgeworth? I think Maria Edgeworth, the author, also wrote a satire of Pamela. And it shows her as like this just conniving fortune hunter. I think Fielding's does as well. They both present Pamela really as this little conniving fortune teller who connives her way into the upper classes by feigning her virginity, and that she doesn't want this guy to touch her, and she wants to be left alone, and that all of it was just a scam and a performance to get him to want her so he could marry her and she could become a lady. So there are a couple satires of Pamela when they came out. Shamala, and I forgot the name of Mrs. Edgeworth's, but that one was quite funny as well. So thank you all so much for joining me tonight. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to it. And as I mentioned, you can catch me Sunday, my 21st century self. I'm not sure what I'm going to be talking about Sunday yet, at republicbroadcastingnetwork.org, my radio show, and then I will be back here. Oh, if you follow me on social media, I'll be posting a link. Tomorrow is my monthly lecture for the New York City Queens Public Library, and that is at 2 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. And I'll be posting that on Facebook and Telegram, the link to those. Oh, and on Instagram as well. So if you follow me in any of those places, you can get the link to that lecture tomorrow afternoon. And I will be dressed as Mrs. Q, and it's a 1 hour lecture for the Queen's Library. 45-minute lecture, 15-minute question and answer. So you can catch me tomorrow at that, or Sunday on my radio show, or back here next week. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a good week. And I hope you decide to read one of these. Like if you are really into a long summer book, Miss Betsy Thoughtless, a look at the 18th century that you never thought was there. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate you joining me. Oh, Mrs. Healy says, have a great weekend. Hello to Mr. Q. Yes, we will. And Mrs. Healy, hello to Mr. Healy from us. Miss Wetzel, thank you. Have a wonderful evening. You have a wonderful evening as well. Thank you all so much for joining me every week.